And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Widespread immigration raids did not materialize across the country this weekend after President Trump announced them in advance. A handful of raids, however, did still unfold and prompted protests in support of immigrant communities. Agents in Chicago reportedly arrested a mother and her kids only to quickly release them. Arrests were also attempted here in New York City, but migrants reportedly refused to open their door to agents. Authorities say more raids are planned this week. Democracy Now! Was in Queens Sunday when residents protesting the raids were joined by local lawmakers, including Tiffany Caban, who recently declared victory in the highly contested Queens District Attorney's race that is now facing a recount.
Today, our community is getting together not only to protest the raids, the ICE raids, but also to call for the abolition of ICE. You know, acknowledging the fact that it is a rogue agency that puts a lot of our families, especially here in Queens, in danger of family separation and deportation. And really proud of the efforts, actually. You know, we know that there has been an ICE presence in the city, but we also know that so far, you know, we haven't had folks in Queens picked up. And I think that speaks to the strength of our communities, the ways that we're standing together, the ways that we're coming out and saying, we're going to let people know their rights, we're going to do what we can to protect our neighbors, and we're going to continue to do it for as long as we need to.
This comes amidst growing outrage over dire conditions for migrants held in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions by Customs and Border Patrol, including children and families seeking asylum. On Friday, Vice President Mike Pence toured 2 migrant detention centers in Texas, including one in McAllen, where hundreds of men were crowded into dirty cells without cots to sleep on. Many said they were hungry, had been detained for 40 days. Trump tweeted the children's rooms Pence saw were well-run and clean, and facilities for single men were clean but crowded. Pence defended conditions during an interview on CNN and refused to tell CNN's Pamela Brown.
Today was very different for the families versus the single adult migrants. It wasn't the same level of care.
What you saw today was a very clean facility where people were being detained indoors, and then you saw a temporary facility that was constructed because this facility is overcrowded. But everyone, even in that temporary facility, Pamela, is getting 3 meals a day. They're getting health care. They're getting hygiene.
Pence refused to say whether children would be separated from their parents during immigration raids announced by President Trump. Video of Pence visiting the Border Patrol facilities, looking at men in the overcrowded cells without speaking to them, then walking away, was broadcast around the world. At the same time, people held lights for liberties in at least 900 cities in what organizers called one of the largest global mass mobilizations in history. They called for the closure of detention centers and an end to inhumane treatment in them. This is activist Linda Sarsour speaking at the vigil in New York City's Foley Square, just across from an ICE processing center.
I want to remind people that there are children who have died in these camps, and I will say their names here today. Darlene Cristobal Cordova Valle, 10 years old from El Salvador. Jacqueline Cal Maquin, 7 years old from Guatemala. Felipe Gomez Alonso, 8 years old from Guatemala. Juan de Leon Gutierrez, 16 from Guatemala. Wilmer Jose Ramirez Vasquez, 2.5 years old from Guatemala. Carlos Hernandez Vasquez, 16 years old from Guatemala. One day, 30, 40 years from now, people are going to ask you, where were you when children were being stripped from the hands of their mothers? What did you do? What did you say? And you all get to say that I showed up and added my voice and chose not to be part of the silent majority in these United States of America that have allowed injustice to happen for far too long.
That was Linda Sarsour speaking at Friday's Lights for Liberty vigil in New York. Was called to denounce the conditions in jails, child detention centers, adult detention facilities along the border, as well as what people believed, because President Trump tweeted it, that there would be widespread immigration raids across the country, which ultimately did not materialize, at least at this point. For more, we're joined by Elora Mukherjee, a professor of law and director of the Immigrant Rights Clinic at Columbia Law School. She spent about a week at the facility in Clint, Texas, interviewing dozens of detained children. She also represents Konstantin Mutu, the youngest child separated from his family at the border when he was just 4 months old. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Amy.
So I want to talk about both issues, the raids and also your trip to Clint, which is where we want to begin. Pence went there and talked about the conditions being humane and acceptable. You found something extremely different in the Clint facility. Describe what you saw.
We found children who were hungry, who were dirty, who were sick, and who were scared. We found children who had been detained far longer than the 72-hour limit for CBP facilities for children. We found children who had been detained a week, even longer, weeks, nearly a month. We found children wearing dirty clothing, clothing covered with nasal mucus, urine, vomit, breast milk. We found children who hadn't brushed their teeth for days, hadn't showered for days or weeks. We found children who smelled really bad because they had no opportunity to shower or change their clothes. We found children who were hungry. We found children who were so traumatized that they cried consistently and wept in their interviews with me. We found children who had been separated from a parent and from other family members. We found children who had been detained incommunicado without an opportunity to make a single phone call to their loved ones. So we took out our own phones and we allowed the children to make calls to their family members for the first time, sometimes in days, sometimes in weeks.
So these children actually could reach someone in the United States. Did some wear bracelets with numbers on them, at least one?
One child wore a bracelet that said U.S. parent on it. Other children—
With a phone number?
With either a phone number or some other kind of identifier. Other children had little scraps of paper tucked into a pocket in their shirt or in their pants that had the name of a family member. You know, what's so important for America to realize is that the overwhelming majority of these children have family members in the United States who are desperate to have their kids back. So nearly 100% of children who are released from ICE custody are released to a parent or other family member. More than 80% of children released from ORR custody, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, are reunited with a family member in the United States.
So explain the decision to come forward. These visits, like you had, a group of lawyers to interview the children, are not usually made public. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. So I've been doing this work for 12 years along our southern border, representing detained immigrant children and families. I've been a monitor for the Flores Settlement Agreement numerous times. Last July, I was in Brownsville, Texas at Casa Padre, which is a controversial facility. In March, I was in Homestead interviewing children at an even more controversial facility. And in those two instances, I didn't go public with my findings, and I expressed concern about numerous violations of the Flores Settlement Agreement to the plaintiff's counsel in that case. But what we found in Clint was different. What we found in Clint was more appalling than anything I've seen in my entire professional career. I have never seen such degrading and inhumane treatment of children in federal immigration custody.
So what's going to happen? And did you testify before Congress?
I testified before the House Oversight Committee on Friday. We are demanding immediate congressional oversight to protect vulnerable children in custody. We are also seeking the assistance of the federal courts to protect the children in federal immigration custody and to make sure that their rights under federal law and under our Constitution are protected. We're also enlisting the support of the fourth branch of government, the free press, because we need assistance from everyone to make sure that children are not being abused in our name, with our taxpayer dollars, and in our country. The American people have risen up and across party lines have spoken out, have participated in a public outcry to let the executive branch know that children must not be abused in our country and in our name.
Talk about the independent organization or person who has been authorized to go in that the Trump administration has accepted to do oversight here.
So since the mid-1980s, there has been a case called the Flores case. In 1997, a settlement agreement was reached in that case. Part of the settlement agreement allows the Flores Plaintiffs' Council, so the lawyer for the children, to go into the facilities where children are being detained to monitor compliance with that Flores settlement agreement. The Flores settlement agreement sets forth that children must be detained in safe and sanitary conditions, and more importantly, that children must be released from federal immigration custody as quickly as possible. So I've been a monitor for the Flores case.
During an interview on CNN this weekend, Pamela Brown pressed Vice President Pence in questions about family separation. She asked him if he was, quote, concerned families will be separated. And this has to do with the raids. She kept saying, will families be separated? Pence replied, people will be separated from this country who our courts have ordered to be deported. When pressed again if families would be separated, Pence said, quote, the priority is going to be on individuals who've committed crimes in this country, members of MS-13, people who've engaged in violent acts in this country in many cases. So let's go to the second point. These nationwide immigration raids that President Trump threatened the country with, they may not have materialized in force across the country, but certainly the terrorizing of immigrant communities did. But also, the flip side of that is the organizing.
Right. So the point of these raids is cruelty. These raids are not necessary. The data is very clear that when asylum-seeking families have access to counsel, they show up for their immigration proceedings 99% of the time. When asylum-seeking families participate in the ICE Case Family Management Program and are paired with a social worker, they show up for their immigration court proceedings 99% of the time. The point of the raids is cruelty. The point of the raids is terrorizing immigrant communities and playing to Trump's base.
And so, oddly, just him announcing this, it was amazing to see Pence say he wasn't going to say when they would happen because, that would undercut the effectiveness of the raids. And yet his own president, who he works for, his own president was the one who announced it around the country. Maybe his point was not actually to carry them out, but just to terrorize. Maybe it was because of, the census question that he didn't get, that he wanted, the question of citizenship, that he wanted some kind of retaliation for not being able to identify undocumented immigrants.
It is a heartbreaking situation, and the raids will leave children without their parents. The raids will leave children without their caregivers. The raids will leave U.S. citizen children without anyone in America to care for them. It is a heartbreaking situation.
Knowing your rights, forums were held, workshops, people calling in to find out what their rights are. Explain the issue of the warrant. While there weren't nationwide raids on the level that President Trump promised, there were reports here in New York of people not opening their doors to agents. Explain.
Right. So if you are someone who is undocumented and ICE is knocking at your door, here are your rights. You do not need to open the door. You should ask through the door whether the officers have a warrant. If they have a warrant, ask the officers to slip it under the door. Then check the warrant to make sure that it is signed by a judge. Very often, ICE shows up to carry out raids without a warrant or with a warrant that is not signed by a judge. Unless the warrant is signed by a judge, you do not need to open the door. You also have a right to remain silent when ICE is carrying out a raid. You do not need to provide your name. You do not need to state where you are from. You can state, if you want, that you wish to speak with an attorney. If ICE breaks down your door and comes into your house without your consent, you may also state, I do not consent to this search. And for anyone else who is witnessing a raid, I encourage everyone to be an upstander. Stand there. Bear witness, take videos, document what is happening. Try to protect those in our community who are asylum-seeking families, who are refugees, and who have the right to due process while they are in our country.
I want to end with by going to Brooklyn's Sunset Park. While the wholesale raids did not happen, the immigrant community was terrorized. Fabiola Mendieta is an organizer with the New Sanctuary Coalition. She told Democracy Now! About the effects of just the threat of the ICE raids.
Fifth Avenue, I have to say, if you come in a regular day, if you come on a Saturday, Sunday, if you go up to the park, up to 6th Avenue, you see a lot of people. You go to the laundromat, you see we're full of people because usually people is off on Saturday and Sundays. Today, we've been in the neighborhood since 6 o'clock in the morning. Some of my and other friends, they've been here since 5 o'clock in the morning. Everything was empty. No people in the streets, no people in the supermarkets, no people in the restaurant. I think everybody's just afraid to go out and, even to go to the supermarket. They don't want to do that anymore. At least, for, I guess, for this weekend and the days for this week.
Elora Mukherjee, your final response, because the week isn't over. President Trump has threatened that the raids will materialize.
Yes, it's certainly possible that more raids will be carried out, that more families will be targeted, but immigrants' rights lawyers will fight back. We will represent these families. We will ensure that they have a chance to present their asylum cases to the courts. And it's telling that one of the families that was arrested in Chicago was immediately released, a mother and her children. These are not people who pose a danger to our communities.
Elora Mukherjee, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Professor of Law and Director of the Immigrants Rights Clinic at Columbia Law School. Spent about a week at the facility in Clint interviewing dozens of detained children. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to Mancos, Colorado. Denver was one of the places they threatened these raids. Well, hours away is a woman who's taken sanctuary in a church. Stay with us.